In my opinion, that is an excellent sized tomato. It's a heart shape. Look at that. Literally like a heart. That's a lot of tomato. And this is just the beginning.
Guten yardening, everybody. Well, I am super excited for the harvest that we have coming your way today, because a lot of what we're harvesting today is a first time ever harvest for us, because even though we have some cabbage ready to go, we have some of our summer squash, and we'll get all that gathered in, we have a whole bunch of our larger tomatoes ready to be harvested. And for us, almost every single one of these larger varieties, it's the first time we've grown them. And so what I really want to do is focus in on some of these varieties and how well they've grown for us, and some of the characteristics of these tomatoes here in Zone 5, Wisconsin, so you can get an idea of which ones we really liked, which ones really produced, and which ones will probably grow again. All right, let's get started with our harvest.
This variety is called the Mortgage Lifter. That is the biggest tomato I think I have ever grown. Now, the Mortgage Lifters don't all get that size. This is probably a more common size that we're seeing. It's just that one was so big, but it's a plentiful producer. You're gonna see this pretty commonly. I've noticed this on some of ours. We have some bacterial spots, it looks like to me, and the plant itself seems to be dying back, and we're seeing this with some of our varieties as well, where we have this bacterial wilt on there, where we have these spots. But for the most part, I would say it's a pretty productive plant. You can see the whole way through here. Most of these are looking really, really nice. That is an absolutely exceptional Mortgage Lifter tomato. And we've got a whole bunch more on here that are just waiting to be harvested. So this is all from one Mortgage Lifter, and it's got 10, 12 more on here still waiting to ripen up. I pulled a couple of these off a little bit early. We'll let them ripen inside, and this one actually came off when I pulled off this gigantic tomato. I still can't get over the size of this one. Now, our Persimmon tomato actually looks fuller than our Mortgage Lifter tomato. It's grown a little bit taller. We're at about 4.5, maybe 5 feet tall for this variety. It also has a decent number of tomatoes on there. The size for this is smaller than the Mortgage Lifter, but the beautiful color, look at this. It's a nice yellowish orange color. This one actually could probably stay on a little bit longer. I don't see any disease on this one though. This one's really nice and healthy. There's a whole bunch more larger Persimmon tomatoes down toward the base of this plant. There seems to be one more that's pretty ripe right here at the top, and I'm going to go ahead and harvest that one as well. It's just a really, really beautiful tomato. I mean, as a general rule, I love the orange and yellow fruits, like the peppers, the tomatoes, even more than the traditional reds. One thing I've noticed is that this tomato plant does seem to be more disease resistant than our Mortgage Lifter, at least to the diseases that we're seeing here, because we're having a little bit of it right in here. You can see a little bit of it right there, but for the most part, the overall plant is nice and healthy. All right, right next door to our Persimmon tomato, we have a Great White tomato. The size of the tomatoes on this Great White, these are massive. They're not ripe yet. They're ripening a little slower than some of our other varieties, but all the ones down toward the bottom are absolutely beautiful in size. We've still got more of them growing up toward the top. This one's about 5.5 feet tall. It's actually the tallest of these three varieties so far. At least that's how it's performed for us up to this point. We have a little bit of disease on here as well. You know, one of the things we've been trying to do with pruning back our leaves here is to remove some of that disease. Because typically when it comes to tomatoes, if you leave the disease leaves on the plant, it has a greater probability of spreading. So it's one of the reasons why we thinned everything out. If you look at the structure of the stems here, you see how there's no foliage lower down, or at least minimal foliage lower down, and then it kind of increases as we go up. You know, making sure you stay on top of pruning it back is probably pretty important. This seems to be a really nice producer, maybe not as heavy of a producer as the Mortgage Lifter, but again, a little bit more resistance to some of the disease that we seem to have. Can't wait to show you what they look like when they've ripened up. All right, next door we have our Brandywine Black Tomatoes. Now, in terms of overall plant size, these don't really compare to those other 3 varieties I've shown you. They're actually a good bit shorter. These got to maybe 3 feet tall for us. That's it. About 3 feet tall for these Brandywine Blacks, but they are loaded down. I mean, if we take a look through here, well, you can see something right here. You see how this stem, this big stem, is bent over? This should have been supported. We should have tied that up against the back trellising, because there's so many tomatoes on here, so many heavy tomatoes on here, that it couldn't handle at some point, and it bent right over. These Brandywine Blacks look like this. Let me get in here and harvest this. You've got that nice red color and then those tones of greenish black at the top, hence the name of the Brandywine Black. And they actually have a pretty good size to these. I'd say this is probably about 10 ounces, 8 or 10 ounces right here. But this one right back here looks a good bit larger. So I'm gonna try to harvest this and I'll show you how much bigger it got. That is huge. I mean, the size of these tomatoes, we love our cherry tomatoes, but you can see one of these is probably what, 15 or 20 of our cherry tomatoes? Unbelievable. And we do see a little bit more of those bacterial spotting, but again, we can still eat this tomato. We just have to cut that part off. I would say we still have 20, 25 tomatoes on here that are going to ripen up very shortly. I actually pulled one off that is not quite ripe yet, but again, we'll let any that we pull off that aren't quite ripe, we'll let those ripen up inside. I'm gonna go away from those raised beds for a little bit over to our containers, and we just did a video on the New Yorker tomato and how much we really like this as a determinate variety. I've got a whole bunch on here. It's a nice tomato, good for eating, good for canning, but a nice tomato here. It produced well, especially considering we didn't have very much height to these. With a late start, we didn't get them up to their maximum height. They could have been another foot taller, maybe a little bit more. But even so, if we look at the overall percentage, and I like that overall percentage of just greenery to growing the tomatoes, these were really productive. Now, I've already made it clear that we haven't grown these large tomatoes like this in the past, but I can tell you this next one is definitely going to be one of my favorites. This is the Azoychka Tomato. Take a look at these beauties. This bright, vibrant, yellowish orange color. These look magnificent, loaded down on this plant. Now, if we look at the disease on the plant, if we look at the leaves, the structure, we're looking at about a 4-foot tall plant at this point for us, growing in these raised beds. We've kept this one thin, nice and narrow here, but right around the base, about 1.5 feet up from the base, we've got all of these lovely tomatoes. And the 2 tomato plants that we have growing here side by side are pretty consistent in terms of overall production. I'm going to go ahead and get these off of here. Look at that. Soft, ripe, amazing color. In my opinion, that is an excellent sized tomato. Why is it? Why do I like this yellow orange color? I like the taste of it more. When we're talking about our cherry tomatoes, those sun gold, those yellow sun gold, I absolutely love the taste of those more even than our super sweet 100s. Now, right by the Azoychka tomato, we have these Amana tomatoes, this really vibrant orange. Take a look at this beside my hand, the size of this tomato. And no, they're not all that big, but the whole tomato itself looks really nice and healthy. This one's about 5 feet tall. Now, there don't seem to be as many tomatoes here, but again, they are absolutely huge. This variety. This one has a little bit of damage from what I just did just now. Take a look at the size of this Amana tomato. Yeah, I get it. It's not exactly beautiful. It's all deformed. Looks like a caterpillar, the underside of a caterpillar right there, but that's a lot of tomato. And this is just the beginning. All right, next up we have the tallest tomato that we have growing in our raised bed here. It's got to be a good 5.5 feet tall at this point. This is a Sheboygan tomato. It's a nice beefsteak tomato. Actually, as I look in here, I can see there's some through the other side right in here that are definitely ripe. I'm going to go get that one. I think this one likely has the largest density of tomatoes on it. I mean, it is loaded the whole way up and down the stems here on this Sheboygan tomato. It's a really nice size, but it's a little bit later in terms of ripening for us. Yeah, and we actually have two of those side by side, and you can see here on the back side, yeah, that is definitely about average for this one. This one is spreading along the trellis. I mean, we have tomatoes all the way over here from the starting point back here, so they like to spread wide. That's pretty clear. Now, the last of the tomatoes in this raised bed is right here. A little bit of an odd shape, in my opinion. This is called the pink Oxheart tomato, and you can see the size here. We've got a pretty similar shape throughout. It's kind of like this, almost like this teardrop shape. I can see why. It's a heart shape. Look at that. Literally like a heart. It could definitely get a little bit riper, but it's already starting to soften up pretty nicely. More of a pinkish than a reddish tone to it. The overall size of these, that one's on the bigger side, it looks like, but most of them are pretty similar in size. Let me get rid of some of these dead leaves so it's easier to see in here. This one doesn't seem to be nearly as productive as our others. It's about 4 feet tall at this point. I think some of our other varieties definitely performed better, although these are again going to ripen up here, I would argue, in the next couple of weeks. I think we could do better with some of these other varieties that are more packed. All right, so I just went through 2 raised beds, and I probably harvested maybe 15% of the tomatoes growing in there. Not only are they absolutely stunning, but the variety, the different tastes that are going to be here, I think these are going to make some really great sauces and can very well. You know, growing these larger tomatoes is such an interesting experience because there are things we're now going through. We're learning about diseases, pests, etc., that we haven't seen as much in the past with other tomatoes because, well, once the cherry tomatoes start ripening, they typically ripen pretty quickly, and we just don't have to leave them on as long. And so we didn't see some of these issues in the past. The biggest challenge that I think we've found growing in these small spaces so far with these tomatoes, and you can see, look, this is a great example. This tomato has spread. It has crawled the whole way across about 7 feet from where I am into our sweet potato bed. It has leaned across there. When you're growing in small spaces, making sure that you keep these pruned back is important, but sometimes it gets hard to get in there, and then what you end up with is a forest of these tomatoes. Now into our main garden, where what we've noticed is a lot of our tomatoes here, except for our volunteer tomatoes, have started dying back a little bit earlier than other places. And so, I mean, they're competing against a lot of other plants here in terms of nutrients. The lighting here is different from our other garden spaces. And back here, all along this back, all that you see here, all those tomatoes, that's all volunteer. The tomatoes that we planted are right here along the trellising. Now, we're not just harvesting tomatoes today. Some of our summer squash has got to come out of here. It's getting massive, and we don't want it to overgrow here. So this is an early prolific straight neck, our early pick 2 gold. Love this hybrid. Wow, these are so tasty. And then our green grillers. I have 4 green grillers here that I keep letting get too big. But again, these are really tasty. The fact that we can harvest these green grillers after about 35 days, and we've already harvested a whole bunch off here. These are magnificent.
Now this is a trophy tomato here. It only got to be about 3.5 feet tall. It's not doing all that well here, although it only gets to about 4 feet tall at maximum anyway, but it is producing a lot of these 5 to 6 ounce fruits. And this is a great slicing tomato that we have.
If you look all around it, it is packed with these fruit. There we go. Let's pull this out. Yeah, that's about the bigger size, but there's a whole bunch about that size on this side as well. All right, this cabbage has to come out of here. It's not only ready, the outer leaves are starting to die back. Some really nice heads of cabbage there. This is a little bit smaller, but really tight, compact. It is unbelievable out here. I want to move on and show you the next tomatoes, but as I'm walking by here, I see cucumbers, I see beans, I see lima beans. There's just so much in here I also need to harvest in addition to these tomatoes. So I'm gonna go ahead and get those harvested. Everywhere I walk, I'm seeing these volunteer cherry tomatoes. Our lima beans here, look at this, just about ready to be harvested. There's so many lima beans growing along this line. These pole lima beans are looking fantastic. And of course, our pole green beans that volunteered up, you know they're not going to be finished producing. You got to get out here just about every day, it seems like, to get the beans off of here. And the volunteer tomatoes that came up alongside the trellis beside our cucumbers look like they're just about to produce a bunch of fruit. Our cucumber plants are coming to their end, but I've still got probably what, 3 or 4, 5, 6, 7 more cucumbers to harvest. You know, growing along these trellises, and this is just a bit of fencing, 4-foot fencing, but I think this is the way to go for a lot of our tomatoes, rather than trying to get those smaller cages that you get at the grocery store. They're just not as effective. Here we have our watermelon tomato. You can see the coloration here. This one's not ripe yet. It's pretty nice size, beautiful texture on the exterior anyway for this tomato. And it's kind of spread off to the side here, probably about 4.5 feet tall at this point. I actually just got really excited because I figured out that the cherry tomato that volunteered right here is a black cherry tomato. I love black cherry tomatoes. They are so sweet, so delicious. Oh, I couldn't be happier that we had that variety volunteer. All right, check this out. This is from 2 minutes of harvesting. Our super sweet 100s is cherry tomatoes, some of our black crims and other varieties. That's beautiful. Can you see all of the okra here? Can you see it? Every single one of these plants is packed right now with okra. Some of it a little bit larger than we'd like, but most of it right around 3.5, maybe 4 inches. I'm going to harvest every single bit of this. And I'm just going to focus in on one just to show you this. Watch this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 ready. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So many more on here. That's from one okra plant. Wow. Look at the size of these larger tomatoes. Look at the color patterns here. There's so much that we were able to harvest today. I've got a whole bunch more. There's so much more to harvest out there. There's so many more tomatoes. We're probably talking about 5% of the tomatoes are ripe at this point. So many more that we're gonna harvest. Take a look at all this okra as well. Our okra, our cabbage, golden beans. Absolutely a fun harvest. Well, we hope you enjoyed today's video and found it informative. If you did, don't forget to give us a like, leave us a comment, remember to share and subscribe, and most importantly, remember, when you're with us, you are good to grow.